Good morning. Would you please find your seats? Good morning, and welcome to the 33rd United Nations International Day of Older Persons. It's entitled, Fulfilling the Promises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for Older Persons Across Generations. My name is William Smith, and I am the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York and the main representative to the UN for the Global Aging Network. My day job is I'm president of Aging in America, located in Westchester County. I have the honor of providing welcoming remarks. I am an older person, along with 300 other registrants, many of whom are here, who are older persons and advocates working on behalf of our Convention on the Rights of Older Persons globally. We are working in partnership with the youth, our future older persons, and across generations. Good afternoon and good evening to over 200 older persons viewing these proceedings on the UN Network TV. Celebrations like this IDOP are happening around the world in large numbers. We come to the United Nations during a time of climate crisis, climate change crisis, ageism, discrimination, and other realities for older persons and the global community. We clearly need the support of member states on all of these difficulties affecting older persons in the world. It's my pleasure to welcome our ambassadors and representatives of member states who will be formally introduced throughout the program. Your presence and participation is critical and very important to this work. Many people have worked tirelessly to bring you this IDOP. Our co-chairs, Chris Hanway and Ariana Eliza, with the support of our past chair, committee chair, Cynthia Stewin, have been fantastic. I would like to thank the many staff of DESA, especially Amal Abu Rafe, and Masumi Ono, and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Rio Hada, its Chief Equality, Development, and Rule of Law section of OHCR in New York. They've all contributed greatly to this work. A few housekeeping. First of all, thank you all for coming here in person or joining us on the net on the UN TV. Those in the room, please silence your phones. Use of masks is recommended. Bathroom facilities are on the 3rd floor. And if you are a social media user, please post about today's event. We need your help on getting boots on the ground to advance the work of a convention on the rights of older persons. Engage your contacts and spread the message. I'd like to introduce Christopher Hanway, who is the Executive Director of the Jacob A. Riis Neighborhood Settlement Agency. He has a rich history, and I would urge you to review it in today's program. He is the past chair of the NGO Committee on Migration and now serves on the NGO Committee on Aging's Executive Committee and also chairs the NGO Committee on Aging's Global Alliance Subcommittee. I now, with much appreciation, turn the program over to the chair of our International Day of Older Persons, Mr. Christopher Hanway. Thank you.
Bill, thank you, and thank you for your guidance throughout the organizing of this event. My name is Christopher Hanway, and it is my privilege to serve as this year's chair of United Nations International Day of Older Persons. Welcome. I, along with my co-chair, Arianita Elazai, and our colleague, Roberta Nasser, am one of the main representatives of the United Nations of the International Federation of Settlements and Neighborhood Centers, a worldwide organization, a movement, actually, of over 14,000 neighborhood-based entities that work to ensure the human rights of all people, aligned with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Global Sustainable Development Goals. Settlement houses are, by their very nature, multi-generational and intergenerational in focus, which is why I'm delighted to be joined this morning by dozens of settlement house colleagues from New York City and beyond, including not only from my organization, Jacob A. Riis Neighborhood Settlement, but by our sister settlement house, Sunnyside Community Services, which has become a leader in bringing older adults and folks from across the age spectrum together to fight for just, sustainable, and equitable communities. In that spirit, it is now my greatest honor, and it really is an honor, to read a commemorative message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres. This year's International Day of Older Persons coincides with the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To realize the promise of the Declaration, we must do more to protect the dignity and rights of older people everywhere. Challenges abound. Ageism is rampant in societies. From the COVID-19 pandemic to poverty and climate emergencies, older persons are often among the first victims of crises. Addressing these and other issues is a human rights imperative that will benefit everyone. Older persons are invaluable sources of knowledge and experience and have much to contribute towards peace, sustainable development, and protecting our planet. We must ensure their active engagement, full participation, and essential contributions, including through social and workplace policies built around their specific needs. We must promote lifelong learning, quality healthcare, and digital inclusion. And we must foster intergenerational dialogue and unity. Together, let us build more inclusive and age-friendly societies and a more resilient world for all. With those inspiring words and framing remarks to take us through the rest of today's event, I'd like to introduce esteemed representatives from two of the member states and individuals, two of the member states that have been focal points in the struggle for social, economic, and political rights of older persons, as leaders of the group of Friends of Older Persons. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Fabian Odone, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Argentina, followed by the distinguished delegate, Mr. Claudio Garrido, Minister Counselor at the Permanent Mission to the United Nations of the Republic of Chile. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. I'll have you sit at the podium, I'm sorry. Yeah. You'll sit up at the podium. Yeah. Sir?
Thank you, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. First, I would like to start by thanking and congratulating the NGOs Committee on Aging and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations for their great efforts in organizing this very important event. This year, the theme of the International Day of Older Persons, celebrating and protecting the human rights of older persons across generations, concurs with the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The adoption of the Universal Declaration has been a turning point to fulfill the promises to ensure that all persons, including all older persons, fully enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms. It's an honor and a great responsibility for Argentina to chair the open-ended Working Group on Aging, which is the only body in the United Nations system specifically dedicated to addressing issues related to the protection of their rights. The current international legal framework provides a fragmented and inconsistent coverage of the human rights of older persons in law and practice. Hence, Argentina is convinced that it's necessary to move towards an international legally binding instrument to fully protect their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Recently, and particularly after the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older persons, the progress on developing a dedicated instrument has gained renewed momentum. But why we need a specific instrument to fully protect the human rights of older persons? The answers include several reasons, but mostly to make older persons visible, to finish with discrimination based on age, to recognize their legal capacity, to protect them against abuse and violence, to address the demographic growth of older persons all around the world, to generate public policies that are needed to guarantee the equal enjoyment of human rights of all older persons. In this framework, the current work of the open-ended working group on aging offers a great opportunity. In April 2023, the working group adopted the decision 13/1. According to its provisions, the chair of the working group appointed the permanent representatives of Brazil and Portugal as co-facilitator to conduct open, transparent, and inclusive informal intergovernmental meeting to identify possible gaps in the protection of the human rights of older persons and how best to address them. This process represents a significant occasion to advance in obtaining, for the first time, an intergovernmental document on the matter that is expected to be considered in the next session of the working group. We hope that the member state, national human rights institutions, and civil society in general participate in the process by contributing with their input to enrich the deliberations. Also, let me point out that in the coming discussion of the Declaration of Future Generations, to be held in the process of the Summit of the Future, it's necessary to include the rights of older persons in a prominent place. Young generations are expected to age. Therefore, we need intergenerational solidarity to provide intergenerational solution to ensure the enjoyment of all human rights during the whole cycle of life. In conclusion, let me commend again the NGOs Committee on Aging and DESA for organizing this celebration of International Day of Older Persons, and I invite you all to renew the commitment in favor of the protection and promotion of the human rights of older persons. Thank you.
We thank the NGO Committee on Aging, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs for organizing this event. Chile, as chair of the group of Friends of Older Persons, is eager to take part in this celebration, which will highlight the human rights of older persons across generations, a topic that coincides with the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We would like to share with you a couple of messages. When keeping the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the core of promoting intergenerational solidarity, we must reflect on the link of the life course approach to future generations, with the need to promote the human rights-based and people-centered policy. We want to highlight that by 2050, the number of persons aged 65 years or over worldwide is projected to be more than twice the number of children under age 5, and about the same as the number of children under age 12. The fact is that the youth of today will be the older person of tomorrow, and this should encourage us to foster the participation of older persons in policymaking for future generations and enhance the explicit recognition of the human rights of older persons in the context of the specific risks they face, including climate change, the adequacy of social protection, the adequacy of health system, and others. We already have developed frameworks such as the Madrid International Plan of Action of Aging, calling for the strengthening of solidarity through equity and reciprocity between generations. This requires addressing ageism and ensuring all persons enjoy the human right on an equal basis with others. Moreover, the human right of older persons had present in existing human rights instruments, such as the right to live in the context of climate change, the right to an adequate standard of living, and the right to health, among others. The Secretary General's vision for the future of global cooperation outlined in our Common Agenda report offer a variety of entry points for the United Nations to support the human rights of current and future generations of older persons. We agree with the Secretary General report, our Common Agenda, in that we have the capacity to think for the longer term more than ever before. Therefore, we encourage the strengthening of intergenerational solidarity and reciprocity between the generations in order to ensure social cohesion and inclusion of all individuals of society, regardless of their age. When thinking of long-term approaches, we deem relevant that the consideration regarding the initiative of our Common Agenda respond to future demographic trends mentioned earlier and incorporate the information into policy and planning. And that this discussion acknowledge that the absence of an internationally legally binding instrument for the rights of older persons means that we should pay more, no less, attention to the issue that they are facing. And finally, you can always count on Chile to promote the human rights of older persons, and we look forward to working with all of you in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for your vital messages and your nation's continued tireless efforts on behalf of older persons, including older persons in migration and older persons who have been affected by climate change. We don't want to make you think you have to sit at the podium, so thank you again very, very much. I was remiss earlier. I just want to make sure everyone is aware. If you are not, today's proceedings are available in all 6 UN languages through the translation devices at your seats and also through web TV. So please feel free to avail yourselves to that if you have not already. Before I introduce a very special video message, I would also be remiss if I did not take a brief moment to thank the individuals who worked tirelessly to bring this event to you today. The aforementioned Bill Smith, our fearless leader, and my tireless co-chair, Ariana Elizai, as well as all of our colleagues on the NGO Committee on Aging here in New York, who offered hard work, guidance, and technical support. In particular, Cynthia Stewin, former chair of the NGO Committee on Aging, who gave me this opportunity, Magda Kazmarska, Robin Fenley, and Erica Darr. Thank you all, and this event would never have seen the light of day if it weren't for the consistent and persistent help of our colleagues from the UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs, particularly Amal Abu Rafeh, Aliyah Alali Mossad, and Shato Enfila. Critically important to the success of this event has been the technical wizardry of Amin Lambarat and the BCSS team that allows this event to be heard, translated, and translated. I would like to pay special thanks to Luca Pertanava, the Special Projects Associate from my organization, who worked valiantly to keep this ship sailing. And finally, the guiding light of this process and this event Our moderator, Mr. Rio Hada, Chief of the Equality Development and Rule of Law Section, Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights, New York, from whom you will hear shortly, and of course, whom you will hear at the end of the event, our dear friend and colleague, Masumi Ono from DESA as well. Thank you so much again for joining this year. And speaking of the High Commission, before we move on to the heart of our program, and in the spirit of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, please join me in viewing a video message from the High Commissioner of Human Rights, His Excellency Volker Türk.
"75 years ago, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, 1 in 20 people in the world, or around 128 million people, were aged 65 years or older. By 2050, it is projected that those over 65 will number 1.6 billion people. In other words, 1 in 6 people on this planet will be an older person. The fact that we are living a longer life is immense cause for celebration. Older persons and their leadership, knowledge, and experience are essential to inclusive and sustainable societies and to decision-making and governance that is informed by the past while looking to the future. At the same time, laws and policies need to be adapted to meet the needs and respond to the challenges of aging populations. Not least, this means strengthening and investing in social protection systems, in healthcare and community-based services, as we saw in particular in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of us, across generations, need to work together to address ageism and age discrimination, which remains, unfortunately, pervasive. The combination of age and gender discrimination can place older women in particular at risk of violence, abuse, and neglect, both at home and in institutions, which often remain hidden and unaddressed. To better protect the rights and dignity of older people, we need to strengthen the human rights ecosystem. The current international framework to ensure the protection of and to address the challenges faced by older people remains inadequate and fragmented. As part of the Human Rights 75 initiative, which is led by my office this year, I encourage all states to pledge their commitment to strengthening the protection of older people and to making progress towards a dedicated international instrument to uphold their human rights. By taking steps to ensure the rights and dignity of older people, we will build resilient and inclusive societies for current and future generations. Thank you.
What a powerful and inspiring message from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Yes, indeed. His message motivates us to advocate tirelessly, take bold steps, and collaborate to confront ageism and age discriminations head-on. When we work hand in hand, our collective impact can truly bring real positive change. As we heard from the High Commissioner, quote, "The laws and policies need to be adapted to meet the needs and respond to the challenges of aging population," unquote. In response to the insufficient existing policies for older persons, in 2010, the General Assembly established the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, which has been meeting for the past 13 years to consider the feasibility of an international legal instrument to protect the right of older persons. The group has discussed many topics, including but not limited to ageism, age discrimination, violence, abuse and neglect against older persons, long-term care and palliative care, autonomy, independent living and access to health care, lifelong learning and the right to employment, as well as social protection and social security. This year, the Open-Ended Working Group requested the chair to appoint 2 co-facilitators to conduct open, transparent, and inclusive informal intergovernmental meetings to facilitate the consideration of the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons and identify possible gaps in the protection of those rights and how best to address them. These ongoing meetings include the participation of member states of the United Nations, members of the UN specialized agencies, and observers in the General Assembly, and collaboration with national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations, as well as the independent expert of the Human Rights Council on the enjoyment of the human rights for older persons. The co-facilitators were also requested to then submit proposed intergovernmental negotiated recommendations on possible gaps and options on how to best address them to be considered during the upcoming 14th session of the open-ended working group next year. We are honored to have with us today and joining us at the podium Her Excellency Ambassador Ana Paula Zacarias, Permanent Representative of Portugal, and His Excellency Ambassador Sergio Franca Danese, Permanent Representative of Brazil to the United Nations.
Thank you very, very much. Good morning, dear participants. And at the outset, let me thank the chair and the members of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York for inviting us, me and my distinguished colleague from Brazil, Ambassador Sergio Danese, to participate in this official celebrations designed to mark the 33rd UN International Day of Older Persons. 75 years ago, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, a monumental document in the history of human rights. In recognition of this milestone and looking to a future that delivers on the promises to ensure that all people, including all older persons, fully enjoy their human rights and fundamental freedoms, it is important to underline that this year, this International Day of Older Persons focuses on the theme of fulfilling the promises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of Older Persons across generations. We have just heard Volker Turk, and indeed, it's about time that we give the right attention to better protect the rights and dignity of older persons. As you are well aware, the chair of the open-ended working group on aging, Ambassador Maria del Carmen Scef of Argentina, following the adoption of Decision 13/1, appointed Brazil and Portugal as co-facilitators to consider and reflect on the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons and identify possible gaps in the protection of the human rights of older persons and how best to address them. This is a big honor for us, but also a huge responsibility. And we take this work with great interest and seriousness. The decision invited us, the co-facilitators, to conduct open, transparent, and inclusive informal intergovernmental meetings between the 13th and the 14th session of the working group with all member states of the United Nations, members of the specialized agencies, and observers of the General Assembly, and to collaborate with national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations and the independent expert on the Human Rights Council on the enjoyment of all human rights of older persons during this process. We have been engaging with all the relevant actors the UN system, and the independent expert, by the means of 2 informal briefings, one for member states and one for civil society organizations and national human rights institutions, to present our roadmap for the process and hear your views. And 3 briefings, we organized already 3 briefings, to deepen our understanding of the gaps, visible and hidden ones, on the protection of human rights of older persons. We already had these 2 briefings, one in July with representatives from the United Nations treaty body systems, namely the Committee on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and the European Committee of Social Rights in the Council of Europe, and of course, Mrs. Claudia Mahler, the independent expert. A second briefing was held last month with officials from the UN system, from DESA to HWO, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN Development Coordination Office. Discussions at both briefings were rich and provocative and shed light into the issues that we have been tasked to work on. A third and last briefing will count as members of the panel with active engagement of representatives from civil society. I invite you all to attend this briefing that will be held in November. Allow me also to reiterate our call to answer the questionnaires, whose purpose is to guide the considerations of the issue at stake with inputs we will be collecting from all stakeholders. Our plea is also for you, the civil society, to engage with your governments and urge for their response to the questionnaire. To conclude, let me just say that we will be taking this work very seriously. Let's live up with the commitment to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of older persons without discrimination of any kind. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as a co-facilitator of the mechanism on the identification of possible gaps in the protection of the human rights of older persons and how best to address them, established by Decision 13/1 of the 13th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, Brazil reiterates its commitment to the multilateral debate on this very timely and important issue. We commend wholeheartedly the efforts by DESA, UNHCR, the Permanent Mission of Argentina, and in particular, the NGO Committee on Aging for making today's meeting a reality. Brazil has a long-standing record of engagement on the multilateral discussions on the rights of older persons. This has a direct relation to the elaboration of national legislation and public policies for the protection of the human rights of older persons in my country. In fact, just yesterday, October the 1st, we celebrated the 20th anniversary of the National Statute of Older Persons, a federal law that guides public policy towards older persons in line with the commitments made in the Madrid Plan of Action. One of the priorities of President Lula's government is the protection of human rights in all their dimensions. In the process of restructuring the Ministry of Human Rights and Citizenship, a National Secretariat for the Rights of Older Persons was established, clearly giving the issue a high place in the federal bureaucracy. Furthermore, the National Council of the Rights of Older Persons, which includes representatives from 18 different ministries and 14 civil society organizations, went back on track. At the regional level, I wish to highlight the Inter-American Convention on Protecting the Human Rights of Older Persons, which constitutes, since 2015, a part of the Inter-American Human Rights Protection and Promotion System. Brazil is taking the final steps to ratify and fully adopt the convention, which will reinforce the country's legal basis for the protection of older persons. It has been a long road in terms of assuring older persons of their rights, a path that since 2002 is the correct response to the fact that Brazil's population pyramid is transitioning. In fact, persons of 60 years of age or more are becoming an increasing part of the Brazilian population. By 2060, it is estimated that 1/3 of our population will be 60 or older. In this sense, we welcome the debate on the life course approach to future generations as a means to establish intergenerational equity and solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, likewise, Brazil is a strong supporter of the participation of civil society in the discussions regarding the improvement of the protection of human rights of older persons and the addressing of violations of those rights. One of the key aspects of Brazilian policy towards this segment is the partnership with civil society to identify needs and demands from different social groups within our own countries as regards rights of and policies directed at aging people. In order to carry out the same exercise of identification in the international arena, the participation of organizations such as the NGO Committee on Aging is key. The mobilization of member states in the process is key to complement the work we are undertaking here as co-facilitators with Portugal. As explained by my dear colleague, Ambassador Ana Paula Zacarias, the co-facilitators, with the valuable aid of DESA and UNHCR, have circulated a questionnaire on the identification of gaps in the implementation and observance of human rights of older persons and how to address them. The deadline for responses is originally set for November the 24th. We still have time, but I would like to emphasize the importance of receiving as many responses to that questionnaire as possible. We will recirculate it shortly so that our fellow missions can help us getting as many responses as possible on such an important issue. Being entirely non-committal, these responses will serve as the basis for the document to be put forward by the co-facilitators as a product of the mandate established by Decision 13/1. Member states will thoroughly review this document in a process of consultations until the next session of the open-ended working group on aging in 2024, so that together we can see the best way to go ahead. Brazil would like to emphasize, therefore, the need for all member states to join in this effort in order to establish as clear a picture as possible of the situation of human rights of older persons. This will pave the way for further discussions on the protection of older persons at the multilateral level. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors, for explaining to us all the work that you have done and the plans for the next months. Everyone in this room, especially representatives of the civil society, are pleased to hear that steps are being taken to move the process forward. We all believe that there is an evidence available to show that there are indeed gaps in the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons. We wish to assure you of our support in your important work, and we look forward to your recommendations. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our panel moderator, Mr. Rio Hada, the Chief of the Equality, Development, and the Rule of Law section of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights based in New York. Mr. Hada currently leads thematic engagement on equality and non-discrimination, sustainable development, and the rule of law to mainstream human rights in interagency and intergovernmental discussions at the UN headquarters. He has been leading thematic work on the human rights of older persons for several years and continues to serve as the Joint Secretariat with the Department of Economic and Social Affairs for the open-ended Working Group on Aging. I invite to the podium Mr. Ryohada.
Thank you very much, Ariana, for your kind introduction. I'm very honored to serve as moderator today for our International Day dedicated to the human rights of older persons. First, we have a video message from Dr. Claudia Mahler, the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. She needs no introduction. Claudia just presented her latest report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva last month, which focused on violence, abuse, and neglect. And just last week, here in New York, she presented her report on the human rights of older persons in the context of climate change-induced disasters to the Third Committee at the General Assembly. Unfortunately, she could not stay over the weekend to join us in person today, but she sent us a video message for which we are very grateful. So let's view the video by the independent expert.
I'm very happy to address you today via video message to celebrate the International Day of Older Persons. The topic of this event, fulfilling the promises of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights for Older Persons, is very timely. As we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, unfortunately, the human rights of older persons have not been the focus of these celebrations, despite the fact that all the articles are applicable for people of all ages. Older persons are very often not seen as rights holders, and this is a paradigm shift we need to work on and can achieve through the adoption of a dedicated human rights instrument. Furthermore, we also learned during the last decades that if we want to have changes, we need to fight for them, because it is always a process to shift priorities, to get visibility in a topic. This is why I'm more than grateful to take part in this event. Most of the human rights treaties are applicable to older persons, but they are usually implemented without including a life course approach. Human rights law prohibits discrimination, generally, and names grounds as explicitly protected. But it does not explicitly protect age as a ground of discrimination. Without explicit recognition of age as a prohibited ground of discrimination in international human rights law, prohibition of age-based discrimination or protection against it have been lacking. This leads to the conclusion that ageism and age discrimination are two major areas which must be addressed soon to fully protect all generations of systemic ageism and age discrimination. Conventions with a specific focus have proven that such instruments advance human rights for specific groups, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the most ratified treaty worldwide. But everybody is aging, and after 18 years, the specific protection regime of the Convention of the Rights of the Child is no longer available. The dynamic nature of aging across the life course needs to be addressed, and we must keep in mind that younger generations of today are the next generation of older persons and should have a similar and effective protection available if they are in vulnerable situations. Intergenerational solidarity is not only between children, youth, and older persons, but must also take into account that every living generation should be well integrated in future planning to ensure intergenerational solidarity. Solidarity between existing and future generations requires intergenerational equity. Current policy designs that exclude older persons further prejudice all actions against future older persons, rendering them invisible and therefore further magnifying harms against them. Ageism represents a deep root cause and a huge barrier to older persons' equal enjoyment of all human rights on an equal basis with others. Older persons face deeply detrimental ageism. These beliefs can be so ingrained as to be unconscious. This is true across cultures. Future generations are people of all ages through the full life course, from children to youth to people of middle age and older persons. I wish you a fruitful discussion, and let's continue to empower older persons and advance human rights together.
Thank you very much. The independent expert highlighted the limitation of current international treaties and the paradigm shift that is needed through the adoption of a dedicated human rights instrument. She mentioned ageism and age discrimination as two major areas to be addressed urgently to fully protect all generations. And we need to take a life course approach and strengthen intergenerational solidarity by integrating every living generation in future planning. We will be unpacking these issues further in our panel discussion today. We have a very distinguished panel today. Before introducing them, I just want to ask the Secretariat, is there... Okay. And as you listen to the panel, there are index cards around your table. So please write your question to the panel, and there will be volunteers collecting them. And we will try as best as possible to address your questions within the limited time we have today. So let me turn to quickly introduce our distinguished panel. To my right, Professor Ernest Gonzalez. He's a New York University's James Weldon Johnson Professor of Social Work. He serves as Director of the Master of Social Work Program and Director of the Center for Health and Aging Innovation at NYU Silver School of Social Work. He's a scholar in the areas of productive aging, that is employment, volunteering, and caregiving, equity, discrimination, intergenerational scholarship, and social policy. And his research advances our understanding of social structures that optimize the ability to live a long, healthy, and meaningful life. And we have Ms. Liliane Kunzimana, who's a representative to the UN for the Baha'i International Community's New York office. Her area of work includes youth, intergenerational cooperation, social development, and peace and security. Liliane has done extensive research work on diversity and inclusion. And she currently serves as Secretary of the NGO Committee on Social Development at UN in New York and co-chairs the Communication Task Force of the Global Coalition of Youth, Peace and Security. And Ms. Stephanie Firestone, she's a global thought leader in the area of livable community for all people of all ages and abilities. She's a senior strategic policy advisor with AARP International, where she leads Equity by Design, engaging built environment professionals from around the world to incorporate aging and equity consideration in their work, as well as other global initiatives to advance the planning, design, and development of enabling and equitable housing and multi-generational communities. Stephanie collaborates with international partners such as WHO and leads AARP's engagement around the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. And last but not least, Dr. Emi Kiyota is an associate professor at the Yongloo Lin School of Medicine and College of Design and Engineering at the National University of Singapore and Deputy Executive Director of the Center for Population and Health. She's also a founder of Ibasho, a non-profit organization that strives to co-create intergenerational community hubs that value older persons. She is an environmental gerontologist, consultant, and organizational culture change specialist with over 20 years of experience in the design and implementation of person-centered care practice in long-term care facilities and hospitals, and quality improvement in the built environment for aging services. So I very much look forward to everybody's presentation for about 7 minutes each. So let me turn first to Ernesto. The COVID-19 pandemic has a tragic impact on the lives of older persons, and it also exposed long-standing systematic inequalities and human rights challenges faced by older persons, which are deeply rooted in ageism. So could you tell us about the impact of ageism and age discrimination, and what strategies can we adopt to address them?
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with you today. I do want to send a special thanks to the organizers of this wonderful event here in New York at the United Nations and nation and global wide. And a special thanks to individuals who came so close and from so far. It's wonderful to be with you. May I have that clicker? Wonderful. We are living longer than we have ever in the history of humankind. And yet, when we think about older adults and aging, a number of words that start with the letter D come to mind. Colleagues at the World Bank, and certainly not everyone at the World Bank, characterizes aging with words that start with I. This is indeed a deficit perspective on aging. The question before us is not, how do we live a long life, but rather, how do we live a long, healthy life with a solid economic foundation, with strong social bonds between family, friends, and community, and in a growing, diverse society? May I even dare say, how do we live a long, loving life in community? That is the question before us today. That is the challenge for us in the 21st century. There are many guiding principles that we can discuss, but for purposes of today, I'm going to focus on intergenerational cohesion and its power to unite generations across the world. Productive aging constitutes of several different activities. I won't go into a scholarly debate here. There are many books and programs that we could review, but essentially it's around work, volunteering, and caregiving. These are mechanisms. These are social determinants of health. These need careful social policies that bring generations together. Under the right circumstances, and here I've elevated a moral framework for you to reflect on, the issues of non-discrimination, the right to work, but it's also the right for civic engagement. It's supporting caregivers in the context of living 100 years. At some point, each of us will become a caregiver, and we will also be a care recipient. Our policies are not designed for living 100 years or more in that context. Under these optimal conditions, there are some potential benefits across the micro to macro continuum. At the individual level, there cannot just be economic solidarity, but also cognitive improvement. Various domains of health could actually be achieved here. At the societal level, we know in the United States, civic engagement saves the United States $77 billion annually. So many benefits that we could have. And yet we're constantly pitting each other, slicing and dicing each other into a million different identities and pitting those identities against each other. If we just take the one prism of age, we know that age discrimination is costly. It costs about $850 billion to the United States each year. And yet, if we were to ensure the right to work, we could see an increase in GDP in trillions of dollars. Age discrimination affects everyone of all age. We surveyed a little bit more than 1,000 individuals in the United States, and we asked them, how do you feel about, have you ever been targeted because of your age at work? And some of the items were, I'm disrespected, I'm passed over, I don't receive the support, all because of my age. And as you can see in this graph here, emerging professionals, individuals who are just launching in their careers, those who are 18 to 30, experience being a target of age discrimination at similar rates to older adults. And yet, we constantly have the paradigm, the assumption that it's older adults that experience ageism. We all do across the entire working lifespan. We looked at its outcomes, and it's in the expected direction. Targets of ageism led to reduced job satisfaction, reduced organizational commitment, higher levels of turnover, worse mental health. We also know that bringing the generations together around ageism is a unifier. Systematic review recently published demonstrated that intentionally bringing older and younger individuals together shatters their framework around what it means to be ageist. We have many different programs at NYU. Older adults hold incredible and a number of biases towards younger folks. And so you get them in the room with intentional design, and they start to see the individual rather than operating by their assumption. Intergenerational programs, they're often considered sweet, cute, fun, and they are. But they're more than that. They are focused on Alzheimer's disease, on the environment, on social isolation. They're older tutors going into elementary school children and narrowing that gap so who benefits from intergenerational cohesion? I have my timers right here. They're so good. We combed through over 200 articles, and evidence suggests that even infants have greater vocabulary and language abilities when they have an older tutor. Elementary school children have improvements in reading and math and a reduction in anxiety and sadness. Middle school children, there's demonstration of reduced bullying and improvement in mental health. For high school students, it's about ego and self-concept when they're with an older adult. And college students also benefit with a crystallized ambition of a career and their place in society. Even adults are less concerned about mom and dad when they're volunteering with younger generations. And the evidence here, as demonstrated by these citations, we see tremendous improvement in cognitive functioning in later life, particularly among low-educated individuals and a wide range of other health outcomes to the community at large. So to the question, who benefits from intergenerational cohesion? The answer is everyone. And the good news is that across generations, they're concerned with mental health, education, the environment, healthcare. There's a lot of common ground here to bring the generations together. So I hope in closing, you're guided by the principle of intergenerational cohesion when thinking about social policies and programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto. It's very astonishing to hear those numbers, like $850 billion that age discrimination is costing us just in the U.S. Just in the U.S. Just to put this number in a context, the UN's budget for this year is $3.4 billion, and we are in a tight spot.
Wow, they are.
Now let me turn to Liliane. Ernesto talked about importance of intergenerational cohesion, which brings benefit to everyone. And you have been very active in bringing the voice of youth at the UN. So how do you see this from the perspective of youth? I look forward to your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hara, and thank you so much, Professor Gonzalez, for that illuminating presentation. Excellencies and colleagues, it's an honor to be here. Many thanks to the NGO Committee on Aging for the invitation. I've been learning so much so far. This year, we're being called upon to reflect on an important theme for this occasion, fulfilling the promises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for older persons across generations. So to build on the intergenerational connection, this occasion allows us to reflect on a number of significant events across the UN calendar. We're currently in the third year in the decade of healthy aging, which is due to end at the conclusion of the 2030 Agenda. Member states are thinking about how to revitalize the multilateral system through the 90-plus recommendations of the Our Common Agenda report. At the end of this year, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the UDHR. So over the course of the next 12 months, we will also see the international community coming together to contemplate how to input into the Summit of the Future taking place in September 2024. So this is a lot for all of us to think about. Throughout these processes, groups of populations have unique characteristics that can contribute to how member states conceptualize policy recommendations that will not only shape the current development agenda, but also the systems that conduce to its implementation. In his Our Common Agenda report, the Secretary General wrote that this current generation of young people sees a world in which their future is compromised in multiple ways. But he also said that at the same time, we have the capacity to think for the longer term more than ever before. Young people today are coming of age in the midst of deeply unsettled transitions. Much that was assumed to be certain and settled is now being questioned, and there's widespread acknowledgement that present-day structures are ill-prepared to address the needs of the future, let alone the present. So any society's vision of itself and its future is inextricably tied to its attitudes towards youth. Older persons are part of shaping that vision and seeing the potential in youth to contribute positively to that society, as the professor just mentioned earlier. In turn, young people have much to learn from older generations. They have a responsibility to build on the knowledge that has been fostered by older generations. In the foreword to the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, Secretary General Kofi Annan wrote that each and every one of us, young and old, has a role to play in promoting solidarity between generations, in combating discrimination against older people, and in building a future of security, opportunity, and dignity for all ages. In many cases, because of the special characteristics that youth possess, they are in a unique position to make a contribution to building social environments wherein the rights of people of all ages are valued, respected, and protected. So, what are the social environments that young people can build to ensure that older members of society are not just able to carry on essential functions, but also to contribute to the vibrancy of a given community? Young people are able to connect upwards and downwards. They act as a social good that brings entire communities together. They have the capacity to instill hope in the face of incredible challenges. Their vitality and vigor to mobilize action, together with their ability to adapt to evolving situations, as well as their endurance and perseverance to act for the betterment of society under arduous conditions, has enabled them to face increasingly existential threats. The global human family has much to learn from these qualities as we contemplate the current status of the human rights regime. Although all of us here today see the many possibilities at hand to fulfill the promises of the UDHR, these possibilities are accompanied by a host of challenges. In many cases, we see that national law is usually prioritized above international law in the name of sovereignty. Global agendas create false dichotomies between human rights and development, and ideologies abound that promote economic growth as the epitome of human achievement. Current models have created an environment in which human rights become a contest of power that has weakened trust in international implementation mechanisms. This occasion is a moment for all of us across generations to consult and strategize on how to establish a culture of trust amongst rising generations, to think about how to commit to finding more refined and enduring approaches to human rights that focus on building consensus and mutual understanding, and recognize the coherence between global agendas and the need to dismantle false dichotomies between rights and economic growth, between human rights and development, and between young and old. Duty bearers and rights holders need to move forward through constructive engagement with the human rights system. Actors need to build the capacity to identify and address root causes of inequalities among and between nations, and to rethink actions that reinforce an assumption of unfettered national sovereignty at the cost of aligning national polities with agreed-upon human rights treaties. While such approaches may seem naive to some, young people around the world see clearly that humanity has a shared destiny. The hostility between various identity groups is unlikely to result in the realization of human rights for all, and that new systems and approaches more aligned with the needs of today are not only necessary, but are ultimately inevitable if we are to achieve flourishing societies in all corners of the globe. So I would like to conclude by saying that this current chapter in human history has no doubt been shaped by the United Nations General Assembly's recognition of the UDHR, an instrument that has brought significant clarity around humanity's highest aspirations and has had tangible impact among countless lives. Though many have pointed to the limitations of implementation of the document, the powerful platform it has created for groups of people facing oppression to appeal to the global community cannot be denied. Young people who stand to inherit today's world with its challenges and opportunities are in a position to carry forward an ever-advancing understanding of the rights enshrined in the UDHR in partnership with those younger and older than themselves. This will allow us to bridge the gap between knowledge and action and to continuously harmonize the various strands of social transformation at the heart of the cherished ideals enshrined in the UDHR. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thank you very much, Liliane. Now to Stephanie. So the High Commissioner's video, he mentioned that by 2050, there will be 1 in 6 persons will be older persons, and that he emphasized that we need to adapt law and policy to the aging populations. But we also need to look at very practical everyday things like transportation, housing, public facilities. They all need to be adopted. So could you tell us what actions, what partnerships are needed to build such an age-friendly environment?
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for welcoming me here today. Thank you to the NGO committee. I'm honored to be here. A year ago, the UN independent expert who we just heard from released a report entitled Older Persons and the Right to Adequate Housing, which argues that housing is a basic human right. Yet worldwide, older people have their rights to adequate housing disproportionately violated. They're also among the groups most likely to be evicted and the fastest growing homeless demographic. But even when housed, most people live in spaces that were not built to consider people's changing needs across the life course. I'd like to actually do a quick hand poll, if you'll allow me. Please raise your hand if you meet all of the following characteristics. You are an average height male between the ages of 20 and 50 with full physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities. Could you raise your hand if you fit within that category? Okay, I'm seeing, I think, 3 possibly. Well, you are the lucky ones. Congratulations. You are the norm, essentially, because built spaces were designed for you. And now, can everyone else that falls outside of those characteristics please raise their hand? Okay. I think the point was made, right? We are the unlucky ones because we constantly need to adapt to spaces as we move about our lives. And for that small group of people who raised your hands in the first place, please know that you will not always be in that group. And the environment that we live in directly impacts our level of functioning and our well-being. If it's overly demanding, people struggle. And if it's under-demanding, people don't have opportunities to function within their abilities, which then often atrophy. So this costs individuals, and it also costs society because of the need for supportive services to bridge those gaps. In this space, the global standard that's most cited is called universal design, designing products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for specialization. But in the US, only 1% of homes approximately have basic universal design elements. Ms. Mahler's report points out that among the main barriers to autonomy and independence in housing is the lack of adapted and diversified housing options. I lead AARP's Global Equity by Design initiative, which helps professionals whose work influences how our built spaces function and how they look to incorporate an aging and an equity lens in their work. I'd like to share with you some innovations that we've discovered from around the world. This is from Clarion Housing Group, which is the largest housing association in the UK and one of its largest housing developers. Clarion's director of regeneration was among experts from a global forum we did in 2019, and that discussion prompted him to lead a year-long effort to develop a company-wide age-friendly strategy. It includes age-friendly design and building schemes, ensuring residents have the right home for them at the right time, and helping them anticipate changes as they age, as well as targeting a reduction in isolation and loneliness. On a much smaller scale, Ava Housing, a small NGO in Ireland, targets a common problem in many countries, which is where an older person remains living alone in a home that is too large, may no longer be safe for them, and is often too expensive for them to maintain on fixed incomes, particularly with increasing property taxes. Many of these people are asset-rich but cash-poor. Ava found many older people living in a two-story housing typology that was commonly built in Ireland post-World War II. So they received municipal approval for a few design modifications, and they work with the homeowner to modify the ground floor for the older person to live in exclusively and create a rental unit on the second floor. Ava coordinates the design and construction services. They help with the creative financing. They take care of all the legal and payment aspects related to tenancy, from identifying a tenant, whom, of course, the homeowner must approve, to mediating disputes if needed. This scheme also tackles broader affordable housing crisis that is prevalent in cities around the world, particularly a shortage of units for single persons. To recruit the tenants, Ava partners with nearby institutions that employ essential workers, like a hospital, where residents come through for a year or longer. So they're not only creating intergenerational living arrangements that address social isolation, but how wonderful for the older person to have someone with a medical background living in their home. We also want to show small groups of people and communities around the world how they can take meaningful action to make their communities better support people across the life course. To inspire communities everywhere, together with the Pan American Health Organization and another global NGO, HelpAge International, we identified and in some cases catalyzed action in a number of Latin American countries and created this toolkit, Let's Go, Steps for Engaging Older People and Improving Communities for All Ages. I'd like to share two replicable examples in the area of public transportation because helping people get to where they need and want to go is another critical aspect of the built environment. In La Plata, Argentina, Red Mayor, a network of organizations for the rights of older people, developed a campaign to raise awareness of the challenges older people face when accessing public transportation. They did a protest. When the lights turned red, older people stepped out in front of the buses and held up these signs with slogans, wait before starting off, etc. After the protest, they met with the mayor, and one of their wins was getting the municipality to acquire new buses with additional accessibility features. In Costa Rica, the municipality of Cartago enlisted 15 transportation companies for an education campaign. Bus drivers visited daycare centers and spoke with participants so they could better understand aging and the needs of older people. The municipality also ran an integrated media campaign to raise awareness among bus operators and drivers and the public about showing care and respect for older people. I want to end by reinforcing the urgency of acting. You heard some of these data points about the rapid aging around the world. By 2050, the world's population of 60 plus will double, and those 80 plus is expected to triple. That's the fastest growing age group. And at that time, less than 30 years from now, 80% of older people will be living in lower and middle income countries. You heard the High Commissioner for Human Rights from, the permanent representative from Brazil talk about the aging in Brazil, which is one of the fastest in the world. So our built-in infrastructure has to adapt to ensure that all people of all ages and abilities can thrive in the spaces where we live and work and play and pray, and we all can play a role. Please join us for upcoming Equity by Design events. Check out the resources we have at aarpinternational.org and a variety of other helpful resources at aarp.org/livable. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now, we turn to our last panelist, Amy. So when the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability was being developed and adopted, the slogan was, "Nothing about us without us," right? And it goes the same when we look at the human rights of older persons and developing policies and eventual a convention on older persons. So meaningful participation and empowerment of older persons is key in creating resilient and inclusive society, as High Commissioner said in his video message. And it is fundamental for human dignity. So I very much look forward to hearing your experience and examples of how we can build that empowerment and supporting the participation of older persons so that they can continue to be active and thrive in communities.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this opportunity to share my experience working with older population and younger generation too. I would like to start with one slide. The time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. The way to be happy is to make other people happy. This quote deeply resonated with me as it highlights the stark contrast between our current approach to care and aspiration of older persons. Everyone wants to be useful to others, regardless of their physical, cognitive, and the age differences. However, our current system often views older person as recipient of care rather than recognizing their ability and potential to contribute meaningfully to others in their community. As our society ages globally, we must shift our mindset collectively. It is crucial that we begin to recognize older persons as a valuable asset within their communities, empowering them to become catalysts for change. This transformation challenges the prevalent narrative of aging and redefines societal role of older persons. Older persons are increasingly being marginalized around the world, even as their numbers are growing rapidly. Far too often, aging is viewed as simply as a process of decline. The growth that accompanies aging invisible to society. As a result, older persons are effectively cut off from the flow of daily life, their wisdom, perspective lost to the children and the younger adults. So how can each of us play a role in co-creating a shared future where aging is not something to fear, but as an opportunity for all of us to discover our potential and meaningful growth throughout our life? To create desirable place and space for aging and older people with purpose and meaning, we must begin by transforming our mindset regarding older person. Societal perception shapes how we design environment in which which in turn reinforces our attitude toward users, in this case, older persons. To reshape this loop into positive loop, our starting point should involve incorporating the voice and experience of older persons. These are the image of the community that we worked on after that great earthquake in Japan 2011. Our objective at that time is to co-create community hub where older persons are able to go eagerly and engage and contribute back to society. This community hub was run by older person for last 10 years, and we just celebrated 10th anniversary, and it's been operated by a group of older people in the community. This principle-based ibasho was developed to challenge prevalent negative perception about aging. It empowers older people to co-create program, operation, and physical environment where they can actually contribute back to the community rather than being taken care of. These 8 principles are derived from collective learning and experience from us, and it is enriched by the input of older persons. And when you look at these 8 principles, those are very simple, common sense, but sometimes common sense can be difficult if our mindset is not set up right. So this, the methodology for this ibasho principle, it is very, very simple. We empower older people and become a resource within the community. They become mentor, they become change agent, and they become a catalyst to the connective others. And together, we co-create program, operation, and space, ensuring their self-sustainable management over time. And then we will integrate ibasho 8 principles. So let us reflect some key learning from my and our organization's learning in changing our mindset through elder-led community project by placemaking. We aim to co-design places that empower older persons to contribute to others, that foster the sense of purpose and meaning. We aspire to co-design space where older persons actively participate in the decision-making process and will make sure that decision-making process, they will be included in that team. Our vision includes co-design space that ensure accessibility and encouragement of people of all ages and different type of interest to share in this space, respecting others' unique preference and needs. We endeavor to co-create places that facilitate intergenerational collaboration. In that, we address community issues together across the generation. Our mission includes co-design places that challenge ageism with older persons actively engaged in teaching younger generation. In this case, older people are teaching digital class to the younger generation. We aim to co-design places older people play an active role in disaster preparedness for climate change-induced natural disaster. When our project lacked the participation of older people, we unintentionally perpetuate dependency through protecting others, ageism through providing special service for elders, stigma provided by specially designed service-built environment, and it might create segregation through age-specific design approach, and social isolation through excessive convenience and technology. In conclusion, I like to share a lesson learned from working with older people and the community members. Community is something that we have to negotiate and create with others, not something that we can passively receive. These quotes teach me and teach us, aging in place intergenerational community cannot be designed for the older people. We must ensure to encourage their participation and design with them. And lastly, it's important we should design program and space enough then that leave enough room for them to create their own community where people all ages gather, not to over-design. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all these questions. I was trying to cluster them while I listened to Emmy. And many of them address to so I try my best to a little bit paraphrase different questions to the panelists, and some of the questions can be answered by more than one panelist, so please feel free. And at the end, when you respond to these questions, I will also like you to end with some thoughts about one or two recommendations that you can bring to the audience today. So there are a couple of questions around ageism and social policies. How do we create more active engagement between generations to address those ageisms? And there's one particular interesting question about the intersectionality between gender and age discrimination. Maybe you would like to address that. And also, what social policies are needed to ensure those intergenerational cohesion. And there are a few questions, I guess maybe Stephanie can address around, like when you talked about the adaptation, right? It also comes with cost. And that was also a hurdle when the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was negotiated. So how do you look at the economics and the cost aspect of that adaptation? And also, if you like, you can also, when you looked at you talked about homes and transportation. What about other public places like parks and open spaces? How can that be a critical part of that environment? A few questions, I guess, for Liliane around advocacy and awareness raising. And basically the questions are, how can we all learn from the activism of the young people, and what are the sort of effective strategies to advocate for older persons' rights and intergenerational solidarity? And lastly, I guess these are for everyone, but maybe for Emmy. When we talk about future generations, we cannot talk without mentioning about climate and environment. So how can that part be more integrated in our conversation for the rights of older persons? I hope you had a time to reflect, Ernest. So can we start with you?
Sure. All right. As I understand it, it's a two-part question. One is to unpack, depending on when you received your education, this will resonate with you, cumulative advantage and disadvantage, right? So there's a framework that suggests that multiple marginalized identities build upon one another in a structural context to lead to disproportionate negative health, economic, and well-being outcomes. So cumulative advantage and disadvantage. If you're in school now, it's also known as intersectionality. And these theories play off of each other quite well. For the person who's running the PowerPoint, if I could ask you to bring up this slide in that deck, it's hidden, so I'll hold it up. As that gets pulled up, the second part of the question is about interventions, What can we do about intersectionality and multiple marginalized identities? And so let me get to that kind of potential solutions here. Initially, I was thinking it has to occur across the micro to macro continuum. Each of us harbors a ton of biases all within ourselves. And that essentially exudes itself in its behavior interpersonally, and then it gets played out in the workplace, in the neighborhoods, in everyday experiences at the grocery store. But it starts with ourselves. All right, I think that's a pretty good answer, but it's not sufficient. I think you'd agree it's not sufficient. On the other side of the spectrum, it's all of our delegates. We need to send a clear institutional message of what we value and what we don't value in society by passing certain laws. Currently in the United States, we do have age discrimination laws, but it only protects individuals who are 40 years and older. And there's clear evidence that it's everyone in the workplace that experiences ageism. So there's a bias built into that structural element. So working along those continuums, I think we could find some balance, but it's still not quite satisfactory. I've been undergoing the literature review right now and saying what works best in ending ageism and racism, ageism and sexism. We've collected a little bit more than 8,000 articles. To our preliminary analyses right now, there's not a single study that has tried to tackle two isms at once. So there's a limitation in our theoretical orientation. It's a limitation in our empirical work. That's, I think, the next step. But we need to get to a higher level cognitively. I just participated in an intervention, it's restorative justice. So many, there was about 20 of us. It was on Zoom. It was painful because it was on Zoom. But there were so many identities coming to play. And I thought here in this racial restorative justice workshop, we would be talking about race. The facilitators didn't mention race once, but they managed to get us to see each other's humanity. By the way, this was within the workplace at NYU. So we weren't focused on racism per se. We weren't focused on sexism. We weren't focused on all of these isms, but we managed to see the individual. And I think it's that metacognition that we need to get to address intersectionality. Now that this slide is pulled up, you'll see that this is a survey and some analyses that we ran in the United States. It's a representative sample, a little bit more than 8,000 folks answered it. And the response that they're giving here is, in your everyday experiences, why do you think you were made fun of? You were treated with less respect? You were disregarded? Do you think it was because of your race, your age, your sexual orientation, your gender, your physical ability, nativity? There were 13 reasons. And you can see up here, at least, ageism was the first, if not second, reason that Blacks, Latinx, and white individuals reported being discriminated against. So ageism is a common ground. I think we can start from there. When you start to discuss about racial justice, you can see, at least between blacks and whites, they're on opposite sides of the spectrum here. For blacks, it's racism number one. For whites, it's the last reason. But a common feature is ageism. Think about the other sort of data we presented. I presented about ageism across the lifespan, another common feature. So there's an ability in which we could tap into metacognition, we could see past our internal biases, and we could start to shape social policies. But I think, and I actually have debates with my mentor back at WashU all the time. She actually believes that laws that protect individuals against discrimination on age is not all that effective. But I think it's actually a very important cultural message of what we value and where we are with society. So those are just a couple of ideas on intersectionality and some solutions.
Thank you. I guess I'll go in the order of the presentation. So Lillian on advocacy or strategies.
Much, Mr. Hara, and thank you for the question. I think for many of the people who are familiar with the UN system or who have been advocating within kind of this ecosystem can recognize that there's a multiplicity of groups. There are many different NGO committees and task forces and groupings. And because of the nature of the system that we work within, it's very natural to group with the individuals who are facing similar issues. And those individuals tend to look very much like the way you look. So there's maybe a built-in silo there. And I think for young people, because of, I think, the tools that are at hand, have been able to navigate that system very easily and successfully. And I think I can think of, for example, within the climate change conversation, young people have been very much at the forefront in making use of many different tools. But I think with the panel here has presented that many of the issues that are facing all of us have effects on different age groups in very specific types of ways, and there's a power in coming together and advocating together. And there are a number of things that I've noticed that have worked well. So I'm recalling over the past 2 years with the Baha'i International Community and the NGO Committee on Aging, we have worked together and presented a side event in February during the Commission on Social Development. And I think when you have groups coming together and sharing common questions and concerns, creating environments where everybody is welcome to learn together, that is a step in the right direction because you pool your knowledge together. I've learned so much from my colleagues at the NGO Committee on Aging, working together. See Erica smiling across from me. We had very interesting times working together for CSOC-D. And I think the results of that is you get friendships that last. And through those connections, you're then able to build on that and advocate together in different spaces. So that would be my recommendation, is that, yes, it's important to advocate for the group that you have knowledge about and so on. But I think sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone and creating relationships with individuals across the UN community, you will find that there are stores of knowledge and wisdom and experience that will help you in your own work, but that will also elevate the work of others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I count on our continued collaboration. Now let's turn to Stephanie then.
Well, thank you for the question. So I think I hear the questions to me were about two areas, one housing and then the other in public spaces. So I'll try to address both. So in terms of housing and its costs, I think first of all, we need to address some of the individualism and the fierce sense of independence that is prevalent in our societies today. I have to do this on my own. I think that's plaguing our society in very negative ways, and I think that intergenerational cohesion is one of the critical solutions. So sharing living spaces, living together across multiple generations will both reduce cost and address some of these issues that plague us. I wanted to point out multi-generational living across the world is on the rise. In the United States, it was sort of at a low point in the 1980s at about 12%. Before the pandemic, it was 21, 22, and today is almost 25. Obviously, the pandemic, people for economic reasons often needed to move in with family members or friends, but and a colleague of mine, Donna Butts, is here, who says, families may come together for economic reasons, but they stay together because they want to. And one of the things that we've learned through some of our research globally around how people perceive of multi-generational living, we have a lot of immigrants in this country from Latin American countries and Asian countries where multi-generational living is more the norm. And that stays true in the United States when those generations, the immigrants come here. They maintain some of that tradition as well. And so I want to just get us to think about a shift in the narrative around multi-generational living and its importance. How do we do that? So, there are different regulatory structures in different countries. In the United States, a big one is zoning. We need to change our policies. There are a number of cities around the country who've already limited single-family housing in order to create a little bit more gentle density. We're not talking about sky rises in the middle of neighborhoods. So we wanted to quell some of the fears that people have when they think about creating a little bit more gentle density. And some of the ways that we advocate for that at AARP are through accessory dwelling units, which could be attached to a home. It could be in a garage, above a garage. It could be a detached structure, but a small self-contained unit where someone can live, a caregiver could live, a young family or a single person who is in school, a student, could rent that space at an affordable rate. The older person could move into that space and rent out their larger house. That's become too big for them, as I mentioned earlier. So that's one way. Another is called missing middle housing. The kinds of housing that we had here, duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, that we had here, in the 20s, 30s, 40s after the war. We had a lot of these built, and they've been zoned out in many places, and so that's one area. That brings me very much also to another pandemic that I want to mention briefly, which is that of social isolation. This is one that's been discussed in the news a lot lately. In part, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report just a couple of months ago about the pandemic of social isolation. We know that loneliness from studies is the equivalent in terms of its health impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There are some countries who've created ministries of loneliness. So this is a global pandemic that we need to address. And Ernesto in his presentation talked about the sort of intergenerational programming piece. What can we do in the physical infrastructure in our communities to facilitate spontaneous intergenerational interaction in addition to multi-generational living? And there's a lot that we can do. I'll name 3 quick things. One is, and this is maybe sound a little shocking, but restrooms in public spaces. We don't have enough restrooms and the right types of restrooms that are for welcome people, that are accessible, that welcome people of all genders and are safe for them, that serve people who need someone else to help them in the restroom. And as a result of that, many people, older people, people with incontinence, do not leave their house as often because they're afraid that they're not going to find an adequate restroom. Another issue is walkability. That's a very big issue in so many communities. How do people get from one place to another? There was the transportation element, but in transportation, there's a problem we call the first mile, last mile problem. Okay, there might be a transportation hub a mile from your home, but how do you get there if your mobility is limited? How do you get to a grocery store? So walkability in terms of safe sidewalks that are maintained well, safe crosswalks, having benches at regular intervals so that people know that they can rest along the way if they know they have mobility challenges, things like that. And then the last one that I'll talk about is open spaces and parks. We've seen through the pandemic how critical open spaces have been to us for fostering engagement, even if we needed to be 6 feet apart. But how do we create those spaces in ways that they do foster that engagement? We have benches maybe at a park that might be lined up side to side. What if we created benches that were across from people so they could actually engage with one another? Looking at playgrounds and play equipment, how come it's only for one particular age? We can create play equipment that's for everybody. We can create play equipment that is intergenerational. There are some things out there. There's a swing that's created that for a toddler or maybe a person with a disability on one side who can't swing, and a person right across from them who can propel the swing, and they're looking at each other. They're attuning with each other. They're engaging with each other. We can create play spaces. Play We have a case study on this, so I won't go into detail, but you're welcome to look at it. Very interesting. Play, the founder of the National Institute of Play says play is as essential to our well-being as sleep for people of all ages. And so how do we play more? How do we facilitate that? There's an organization here in the US, a nonprofit called Kaboom, that talks about play spaces everywhere. We can make play spaces at a bus stop. You can have a swing at places where you're killing time. In a laundromat where you're dragging your children and the children have to sit there. Well, you can create play spaces from almost anything. One of the most critical play spaces and one of the really great innovations out of the UK is resident-led play streets. So the street right in front of our home is a place where we spend a lot of time, a place where we can get to know people if we close off the street, for regularly for play. And older people come and share the games and the songs that they used to sing with their games, and teach younger kids and get the energy of the younger kids, and that creates a lot of solidarity, which this organization found during COVID was so critical because the people on the street knew each other, and they knew who was vulnerable on their street and who might need help getting food, and that was extremely helpful. So I want to just shape the way that we look at the open spaces in terms of facilitating interaction across the generations and intersectionality across the intersections that we have in our society, because we don't need to go this alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So now, Emmy, you have the last words.
I think the project that I shared was we have created few places, and I happen to be all post-disaster area. People always ask me about why does it take like a disaster to do what you do. We are not really waiting for that, actually. But I realized that the original issue of aging society was already happening. And I think the disaster kind of bring up the existing issues into the surface. So we were able to deal with it because the issues were in front of them. So when the natural disaster happened, most of the time, older people are very vulnerable. The casualty is high, but at the same time, they can be resources. I think that's the part that we should not forget. When I went back to Japan after 11 months after the disaster happened, it was debris all over the place. And I sat down with persons who lost 6 family members sitting in temporary housing units. And me not being very aware what they really needed, I was asking her, how can I help you? And she said, I'm very grateful that I have a house to live in, I have a clothes to wear, I have food to eat. And I'm so grateful, but Amy, it's been 11 months being recipients and receivers, and it's very hard. Can you please help me to help others? I want to do something. If I can just write a letter, thank you letter, I will do. And I said, why don't you do it? Because no one asked. No one offered. People come to help me, but she was to help others. To me, it was a really interesting moment thinking that, maybe older people needs to be asked simply because they have quite a bit of experience and wisdom. I was able to join one of the research team and ask around older people what motivated them to evacuate, and they were saying that it was my neighbor or my friend came, and it was time to leave and time to evacuate. That really tells you that you really have to have a social relationship, and young people might not have as much as older people's social connections in the community, and I think that's the kind of valuable assets that we really have to look into. So another story I heard, rice was delivered, water was delivered. If I were to ask to cook Japanese rice with fire, I don't think so. But older people were able to do it because I need electricity, I need water system. That's how I grew up. But sometimes, just older people's wisdom and experience, it doesn't require a lot of technologies. And when that natural disaster happens, I think that's a kind of as assets that we really have to pay attention to. And I had a little bit of, it was only one slide, but it was older people making a map, actually. Because what we realize in those places, Nepal, Philippines, Japan, they had a heavy natural disaster. They didn't have evacuation map for older people. It was very simple. It was for the younger generation, we weren't really prepared. But our elders decided, why don't we just make this, the map that works? And one thing that we learned was that if we design evacuation map for relatively vulnerable older population, and that works for pregnant women, it will work for children. So I think sometimes we just try to kind of program intergenerational activities and intergenerational bonding. But, sometimes when we empower older people to really create something that works for them, that actually serve quite a bit of wider populations, that, to me, I just wanted to address that. So the map, they created a map and they decided to make a little signboard, and it's now next to the bus stop. So people can actually see the map. It's handwritten once, but it works. But I think that's the kind of attitude I feel like, climate change, sometimes we rely on so much on technology for preparations, but maybe we can rethink about what's existing knowledge that we are able to tap into. I actually like to, this is not connected to climate change, but I'd like to make two comments about intergenerational cohesions. When I'm working with Japanese elders, 65 years old are the younger ones. Our elders always say, oh, we have help from young people, and they're 67 or 72. Sometimes we forget intergenerational bonding means that it's not older person and young children. It is a different generation, and we cannot really ignore the fact that 105 and 65 has huge generation gap. But, so I would like to propose that when we start to discuss about intergeneration, try not to have perceived, like a preconceived notion about what is intergenerational look like, because we have, older people are heterogeneous. If we were to say, like, this is for the older people, when you talk to one older person, that means one older person. The rest of the people are very different. But sometimes we kind of put people into category based on the age. And I think we really have to check ourselves into that and just start to think slightly different.
Thank you very much. I remember there was a lawsuit in Netherlands or somewhere, in which a 50-year-old person sued the government because he felt that he was not considered as older person. So age is all relative, and older persons are a really diverse group. So this has been a very rich discussion. I'd like to thank all the panelists and participants for highlighting key elements of building an inclusive society anchored in the rights and dignity of older persons. And after all, this is what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights put forward as a vision, that respect for human rights should be an imperative for everyone, for all governments and all parts of the society. And I hope that today's discussion and excellent examples presented sparks more commitment and actions by all to strengthen intergenerational solidarity and the protection of the human rights of older persons. So thank you once again, and let's have a round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. Hada and the panelists, for such a thought-provoking moderation, presentations, and discussions. You have given us much food for thought and action. We very much appreciate the sharing of your areas of expertise and the time and effort it took for you to be part of today's commemorations. And now I have the honor to introduce Masumi Ono, the Chief of the Social Inclusion and Participation Branch in the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Perhaps the best introduction for Ms. Ono is to acknowledge the tone of collegiality and collaboration that she clearly sets for the entire branch, covering topics on the different social groups, including older persons, youth, persons with disabilities, and family. I believe effective collaboration requires vision and engagement at all levels, including with all relevant stakeholders, civil society, and member states. The name of your branch says it all: social inclusion and participation. Ms. Ono, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ariana, for those kind words to me and my team. Our heartfelt thanks to our speakers and moderator for a really rich discussion that opened our minds. I mean, this is a big room full of people, but I felt like the conversation was really close-knit and really heartfelt, so thank you for that. The message we heard was loud and clear today, and that is intergenerational solidarity and the rights of older persons. When generations unite to work together with a shared purpose, we are able to grow closer to a just, equitable, and inclusive world envisioned over 75 years ago in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. At the forefront of these efforts, working tirelessly, are all the older persons here today and around the world, building a society that empowers and respects people of all ages. Your voices, experiences, and advocacy play a pivotal role in advancing the mission for all generations, serving as a constant source of inspiration and motivation for the work we undertake daily at the United Nations. Member states are rolling up their sleeves. Under the leadership of Argentina as the chair of General Assembly Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, the co-facilitators, His Excellency Ambassador Sergio Franca Danese of Brazil and Her Excellency Ambassador Ana Paula Zacarias of Portugal, have been leading the intercessional process. On behalf of all of us, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Fabian Odo of Argentina and Mr. Claudio Garrido of Chile and the group of friends of older persons for their support and sparing no effort to continue highlighting the importance of the protection of the human rights of older persons, especially as we mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Working closely with the NGO Committee on Aging in New York has been absolutely delightful, and we cherish our long-standing partnership. I must acknowledge Cynthia Stuen, who has been a tremendous support to us during her time with the committee. Our sincere appreciation also goes to its chair, Bill Smith, and Vice Chair Robin Fenley. And let us all join in thanking those who spearheaded today's event, the chair of the UN International Day of Older Persons 2023 Program Subcommittee, Christopher Hanway, and Ariana Elizaj and Luca Pertinaga.
I'd also like to sincerely thank our amazing interpreters for their dedicated work in translating today's event. Their efforts have allowed us to spread today's important message to a wider audience across the globe. And an enormous thanks to my own team, who are a group of dedicated professionals committed to the cause. I've done a lot of thinking, but before we go about our busy day, I invite you to please take a moment at some point today to reach out to someone outside of your own generation and ask how their day is going. Each of us is unique, and we are many things. So you might learn something new and maybe even a hint for how to bring systemic changes needed for realizing a society for all ages, in addition to what you learned today from our wonderful panel. So let us continue to work together. Thank you.